Well, welcome. I want to start off the meeting just again by reiterating that everything we're presenting tonight is draft. These are draft recommendations. We didn't just come up with them on our own, though. We worked with the steering committee. We went and we met with the New York State Department of Transportation last week to get into some of the details with them. As you may call it Main Street, but it really is New York State Route 96. Victor Menden Road is New York State Route 251, Maple is New York State Route 444, and so ultimately this really has to be an interjurisdictional cooperative process, and that's what we're trying to do. I think obviously, as mentioned, the steering committee has a number of people on it who deserve recognition, and they've done a great job. A number of them are here. I'm glad to see them because it's been their support from the beginning that's really made this what it is. So with that, we'll get started. You know, we were out here in August. We did a public meeting. We had great participation. I'm going to get into some of the things we did with respect to the identified needs, and a lot of those came from not only our data collection and the things that we do as technical professionals, but more importantly, from getting out and listening to people, listening to elected officials, listening to community leaders, stakeholders, members of the public. That's really the key. It's one thing for us to go back and look at all the information that we have, data and the like, but we need something behind those numbers. And I like to say, you know, the numbers tell us a great deal. You always want to base your decisions on good data. But with that said, the data sometimes loses the, I can't believe this hasn't happened yet, and then you don't know how many times this has happened, almost. So these are the types of things we looked at. So just for tonight, we want to make sure we get through the purpose, how we're conducting this, so you get a feel for the methodology behind it. I'm not going to get into all the previous recommendations. What I want to leave you with is that we looked at an awful lot of plans that were done. We got some key findings out of there. The identified needs, again, came from both our technical analysis as well as the stakeholder involvement. Then get into really what the meat of the project is, which are the draft alternatives, and what our projections are with respect to what the benefits will be of doing those things versus what the impacts are of not doing them. So once we get to that point, we're just going to wrap it up real quickly with next steps and then get to what the meeting really needs to be about, which is getting your comments and feedback to tell us, I like this, I don't like this. Did you ever think about changing this slightly? Did you think about adding this to it? And that's where we're going to go with it. We're going to go through the presentation as we go through the alternatives. I'm going to go through them, I think, at a level that you'll get a great feel for what we're proposing. But I'm also not going to try and predict what all of your individual specific questions will be. So feel free when we get to the comments and feedback to ask questions at that point, and we'll run through this. The purpose, as Glenn alluded to, I mean, the very specific purpose of this project is to identify, prioritize, and describe strategies for improving traffic and operations. And this is not just along Route 96, but within the corridor. And the corridor has a little different boundary. It goes to the north, it goes to the south. It begins to incorporate what we talk about here, which are these key intersections that both impact and are impacted by the volumes of vehicles that we see on Route 96. To do that, we looked at this and we said these are our key tasks. The first one is project coordination. We have a steering committee. We reached out to stakeholders by other means. We reviewed all of the existing plans. There's been a significant amount of planning in Victor, and as we get into that, I'm going to say it again, but the comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2015 serves as a great basis for that. We have all of that. We looked at what's been said and done before. Then we got into, okay, so what's actually out there? What are we seeing? And where we had to go and collect additional traffic data, we did. We combined that with what was available. We were fortunate that the town has required a large degree of I'll say, specificity, is a good term to use with respect to what they require before they approve development. And so there are traffic impact studies that are conducted. Now, the one thing I always like to mention at this point is that those traffic impact studies are typically conducted by the developer. And I use the kind of analogy of when you buy a house, you don't have the seller do the inspection. So these are things that we look at with a great deal of scrutiny, and then we did that by looking at what Clark Patterson-Lee, who is the town's traffic engineer, also did. So we felt very comfortable between their analysis and what we were able to collect the traffic data that we have a really good feel for what things look like on and along Route 96, as well as what they're going to look like going into the future, because that's really what we're planning for. Based on all of that, we come up with needs. Needs are very simply put. Once you look at what you have and what you're going to get, what's the difference between where you want to be and where you are. And that was where we started looking at what are the specific issues along the corridor. We held that first public meeting. It was great. And in addition to the survey that we had 1,900 responses to, the majority of those, vast majority I think it's fair to say, were town and village residents. We also got comments at the public meeting. We had it out here. We had the maps. People putting stickers, writing comments down, telling us what they see on a day-to-day basis, the things that aren't necessarily captured in every one of those traffic counts you do or those travel time indices that you look at. And that was absolutely critical to us going in. With 4,000 comments, we had a lot to sift through. We had a lot to sort through. And I can assure you, we went through every one of them at a very detailed, painstaking level. Because people took the time to give them to us. We wanted to make sure we did our due diligence and did our responsibility, which is to go and look at those very, very thoroughly. We presented those again to the steering committee. And then we came back to the steering committee with these draft alternatives. And they're very different than what we did just back on October 25th. We tweaked them, we listened, we heard, and we incorporated that into what you're going to see tonight as part of the second public meeting. And then ultimately we want to take more feedback and come up with recommendations. So we take these draft alternatives, we pick the ones that work the best after some modification based on what you have to say and what the steering committee tells us. We have some recommendations, then we figure out what the follow-on activities, what is the schedule and how are we going to get these things done. Again, with the schedule from the temporal, but also from the finance standpoint, how are we going to pay for these things? Because that can't all fall on residents of Victor to be expected, or businesses for that matter that pay taxes. They have to do that. The reality is that Route 96 is a regional corridor. You have people coming from many different areas who are coming through. Some of them aren't even stopping, and when they don't, they're contributing to the issues that are arising on the corridor, and they have a responsibility by other state and federal officials to kick in some of the funding to get these things fixed. So the previous recommendations, like I said, I mean, this is just sort of a handful of them. We went through and identified each one. I'm drawing a blank on the number, but I'll leave it as double-sided. When you start getting into all of these things, they're pretty significant. We were able to glean some good information from those, some great ideas. What we realized, and I like to say this, is I think everyone will sit around the table and acknowledge that there's no silver bullet to fixing the issues along Route 96. Everybody nods their head yes and says, yeah, we understand that. I'm not sure people truly accept it though. As we were going through this, we even found ourselves trying to find, what's that one big project that'll get it done? And eventually you just have to come to this acceptance that that's just not the case. It's going to take a lot of things to do this. Our goal though was to kind of go with what I would call, not what I call, what they call the Pareto principle. This idea that 20% of your effort, 20% of your resources can get you 80% of the results. And so that's what we really shot for. What are those really key projects? The comp plan was a solid basis, but like all of them, a comprehensive plan is at this level. And if we want to go and get funding, we've got to get down to this level. So what we realized is that the recommendations we saw that were there were good in whole and in part, but they don't get us to the next level. So our task, which was very challenging, was to take this down and start getting into the specifics of what we're talking about. So beyond all of the things that have already been said, we also went out and said, okay, we're going to have 4 key opportunities for input beyond the steering committee here. And this is an opportunity to widen both the breadth and the scope of what we're looking at, the breadth and the depth of where we're going. And so the first one that we did out of these was a corridor bus tour. We got on a bus and we had a predetermined route, and we drove it around. And we did that with the steering committee and some other key stakeholders. We had the school district on there. We had a couple local business owners. And this is what we found. Was, at least according to the comments and feedback we got on the bus tour, is that the delay in the village and that associated backup that you see, obviously southbound in the PM, northbound in the morning, is a result of there's just not enough space. There's a need for traffic signals, but they also slow things up. We've got pedestrian crossings that sometimes intensify and make the issues worse. Somebody hits a button across the street, everything shuts down, there's a bunch of reds. Then they come up, somebody else does it a little while later. Those signals never get back on sync. They never get to where they should be optimally, because you're providing safe crossings for pedestrians, which is obviously your most vulnerable user, and you have to do that. High Street is impacted by school traffic. The stats are out there that it used to be something like 30% of children were driven to school, and now it's 30% actually take the bus to school, or excuse me, walk or bike to school. We found out delay is welcomed by some business owners, and why wouldn't it be? It's sort of what they say about congestion is sort of like a long line at a restaurant. It means the food ain't bad. These are the types of things you want to take into consideration, and you want to be ready and able to consider as you do this. With that said, there's a certain level of delay where the congestion, kind of to use another analogy from Yogi Berra, it gets so busy nobody goes there anymore. So it's one of these things where we looked at it. Church Street and Linaw, absolutely trying to take a left out of there. Those are definitely issues where people get jumpy, they run out of patience, they're trying to get out of there. Has to be looked at. There's already a plan for the Church Street intersection, for its Linaw, I believe, with the roundabout. So still, Church Street is a little bit, I guess it's considered north, it's really sort of west, but still looking at what we can do to alleviate some of that pressure. Delay at the Main Street Fishers intersection is threatening economic development. We heard this loud and clear. You're dealing there with the New York State Thruway Bridge. That's what it comes down to. What you can do is very much determined from a physical constraint standpoint with that bridge. And the other thing was, you don't see a lot of people walking and biking along the corridor. Not because there isn't space, probably because they don't feel safe doing it. Looking at that was something that we wanted to take into account throughout this. We have some recommendations, more programmatic level, that this is something that really requires its own level of detailed study. For the walking tour, this was great. Got out. It was June, so it was a good day to go for a walk. I don't know if I would have done it in a couple of days from what it sounds like the weather we're going to get, or if I would want to do it, when it's 100 degrees out. But it was good. What was said was, listen, if you go through here, it looks like it's got good bones, but people aren't walking. Why not? And we noticed it was the little things. It was slopes of sidewalks. It was just the way that the traffic is. It was that High Street intersection. I mean, that's a long way to get across both ways. Traffic volumes and the lack of dedicated space make bicycling difficult. And it can even be shared space. If you've ever seen sort of the 3 arrows with the bicycle icon, it's called a share. It alerts drivers to say, hey, wait a minute, this is a space for bicyclists as well. Driveways west of Town Hall are not Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, 1990. It's been around a while, compliant. So these are things we've got to look at. And these conflicts in the continuous center turn lane, 444 Maple Avenue, I saw, the line starts backing up, heading north, and all of a sudden, what happens is people are going around that queue. Try turning into this parking lot right here. You got to get over. Well, those cars are all there. Now, if you stay in the lane because you can't get over, now you're blocking all the traffic that's heading southbound. So there's things there that need to get taken care of. And then, again, one of those intersections, like you see it just through, I guess, what would be the southwest of 96, these backups at Adams Street and School Street. Well, why are they happening? People are trying to get around. They're trying to avoid what's happening on 96, and they want to access the businesses there. Stakeholder survey. Again, we kept hearing it. Delay is the most critical issue. And with that said, we want to fix the delay, but we have a great Main Street. You're not going to replace this Main Street. You're not going to get it back again somewhere else. It just doesn't happen like that. If the Main Street had these bones of a sidewalk, it's got these bones of a wonderful built space, built infrastructure. Public space at that. So if you're going to do stuff, that's great, but people like coming to the village. We have different businesses than what's at the other end or at the western end of the corridor with the mall. Speeding is an issue in multiple locations. We heard this. People said, get out there and fix the signals, get out there and fix the signals. It's been talked about, we looked at it. Again, no silver bullet, so it's going to need to be more than that. And outside of the walking in the village, the town as a whole, it's just, again, we heard the same thing. Not seen as walkable or bikeable. Of those 4,000 comments, and I probably would go so far as to say over almost 2,000 distinct commenters, only 5 people mentioned transit. So that really said something to us about our charge here. Because again, we went back to it and said, go to the public meeting. Probably a lot of people that filled out the survey came to the public meeting. Again, the first, you're seeing the exact same things. There's no change here. What we did here, though, is that Main Street, Fishers, and Victor Menden Road, let's go up a little bit. Let's look at, 251. Let's go look at where Victor, I kind of joke, has this really hidden economy back there. These are high-tech businesses. These aren't just contractors. These are really seriously significant contributors to not only Victor, but Ontario County and the region's economy. So these are things we wanted to look at. Concerns about traffic and safety on de facto alternate routes, and what I meant by that is Cork Dry or Austin. It's what it is. People kept coming up to us and they talked about it and said, this is where it is. If you're looking On the south side of Victor, we got some people who said, hey, make it easier to drive. We got some people who said, don't make it easier to drive. So we had to incorporate all of that into what we were looking at. Coming back to sort of these key things, or key project alternatives, and there's programs, things that are more overarching that you do. The project alternatives, these are the ones we came up with, and we're going to go through each one with you, just so you can get a feel for what we're talking about. I'll give you a minute kind of to take a look at those in case there's one that you really want to pay attention to. Some of them may be things you hadn't thought of or hadn't seen before, but they are all based on not only our technical analysis, but again, that public comment, not just us as technical experts, but you as the day-to-day experts that see these issues all of the time. And with the one related to the bottoms, to the bottom of Woodcliff Drive, I'm not going to get into it too much. It's something that clearly needs to be discussed with the town of Perrin, Monroe County, but this corridor, as I mentioned, affects everybody. It's not just like it's happening in Victor. This is something that goes on. So I know these things aren't always easy to see. Basically what we're looking at here, though, is looking at the railroad conversion to a two-lane street. Let me be very, very clear. This is not a bypass. It is not an alternate route. It is another village street. It is exactly that. It is a two-lane street. I guess, we're not trying to shuttle people so far away from 96 that the business is suffering. So when we did this, we looked at it and said, if we're going to talk about this at all, a couple things have to happen. One, every business on the south side of Route 96, whether it's Main Street in the village or it's in the town, wherever we're looking at this parallel two-lane village street, if they have access, they've got to have access on the other side when we do the road. So what we looked at here was basically, if you're coming up, here's 96, here's Victor Menden Road, I'm going to refer to it as 251. But here's the deal, what we did in here is we put in a left turn lane. We even looked at a signal here. Realized based on traffic projections through 2040 that still show very significant growth for Victor. Some of, if not the highest, in Monroe County and the surrounding area. Put a turn lane in here. Gets people going here. All businesses maintain their access. Here you have dedicated right and left turn lanes. A lot of the reason is that coming through here, you're going to have people taking a right to get out, getting left. Volumes still work. People coming up this way, unless they've got to get to something on the north side, they can come down here. They can choose to come here too, depending on which way they want to go. But ideally, what we're trying to do is give people a choice, options, flexibility. So this is sort of the western segment. In the central segment, there's not a whole heck of a lot here, other than the note that, again, we're keeping all of these. We figured this into the cost, how we're doing it. This is where things start to get a little bit more interesting when we get to this eastern segment. And I did them as western, central, and east because I want to be able to talk about 96 as being north and south, which is the way it's signed. Here again, we maintain the access. We take out the signal here at School Street. At one point we thought about truncating this, and we said no. In talking with the state DOT, why do this? What this means is you remove the signal, there's no more left turn lane. So we build out a bigger island, it's a right in and a right out. There's plenty of other opportunities for people to get back and be able to make lefts. They can do it either down at 251, or they can continue to take basically the new Village Street that would turn into Adams Street down to Maple Avenue. So you're not losing a whole heck of a lot just based on the volumes that we see. Again, these are all draft. This is a mini roundabout, as I mentioned, when we went on the walking tour, and even on the bus tour, you saw this. Trying to get out of here gets really difficult. This mini roundabout, much better than a signal, keeps continuous movement, doesn't require anybody to stop, and it just works better than a signal. So it's not a matter of saying, well, roundabouts are always better than signals, but based on the traffic analysis, it is at this point. One of the things I want to stop and mention, which is very important, because I think when we talked about this, some people have just been like, great, let's do it. There's an active railroad there. There's a Class 3 railroad. They define things based on the revenue as Class 1, 2, and 3. Class 3 are short line railroads. Right now, people have been referring to it as unused. It's not unused. It's active. I would characterize it as underutilized from a service standpoint, but to say that it's unused, vacant, abandoned, that's not the case. So when talking about this, those are impacts that have to be discussed beyond traffic. But what we want to do is, before we go out and throw something out, let's make sure it works, right? Don't go out and say, oh, we're going to do this. As we're going to see, it does have some benefits. But ideally what you're ending up with is this is the parking, so you'd see this is the businesses are over here. Not necessarily have to have a parking sign that's taller than a tree, that's just the only option I had in the program. I was thinking about drawing an arrow just because I'm like, no, I don't need it. I don't even know what that'd be, like a 25-foot parking sign. You'd be able to see that all the way in and probably mass it in if you turned it right. Over and through the drum ones and far away we go. But you've got the sidewalks here at 8 feet. You've got a parking lane. Now there would be recessed parking, so where you have a driveway coming out, it actually is bumped out a little bit, and the parking is there with almost a curb. And the reason for that is sight line and sight distances. It's a lot safer. If you have parking right up against where people turn in and turn out, you can't see what's going on here, and they can't see what's going on here. So it bump out a little bit. The lanes themselves would be 12 feet with these 2-foot offset, and that's for drainage. Be double yellow striped, and this would be basically the remainder of it. Now, looking at this, we'd be able to put in sharrows if we wanted to. We could look at various options. If you've got a sidewalk on this side and there's the available right-of-way, again, if this were to go through, you could look at a multi-use trail or path for bicyclists. If it's wide enough, you can almost do it. And with this, it actually becomes a protected bike lane. I wouldn't go so far as to say bollards and a cycle track, but design issues are sort of for later. What we were looking at is these things. How do we get these moving? And hey, how can we give these folks over here a better way of getting around too if they want to park in one place and walk to another? That's really it. Very key to this though is this idea of Lane Road and Route 251, Victor Mann Road. And I'm sorry that the projectors cut off the screen just a little bit. What we're saying here is that there's a dedicated right turn lane and combined through left. So here's your dedicated right, here's your left, and your through lane coming here. We've realigned the road. Now again, we know there's a big development proposed, that's clear. But we needed to look at it as with traffic growth, and the growth incorporated from this is in the model for traffic. But we designed it as this would be something that would serve Lane Road as it is. We call it a standard intersection because as it's here, this is sort of non-standard, right? We want to put them across from each other. We have a right turn lane here, we have a dedicated left turn lane, and a combined right through here. Again, as I talk about these things, there's no silver bullet. They still have to work in combination. They still have to work in concert. They still have to be coordinated to get the best possible result. Again, I'm going to just reiterate, not only are these drafts, we're also at planning study level, but we wanted to go above and beyond that. We wanted to get as detailed as we could. And so we made sure that these distances, they fit, they work. Yes, are they going to need refinement when you get into scoping and preliminary engineering prior to detailed design? Absolutely. But this is a lot further along than most places are when they do a study like this. The other one, not a lot to show here. This has been talked about. Basically, these cars aren't driving down the middle of the road. These were just on the aerials we used. This is exactly what you basically see at Wilkins RV and Bristol's Garden Center, and we end up taking that same configuration right on down to here, where it all of a sudden becomes back here basically where it necks down on the other side, because what happens is you're making the space for the traffic here, and then eventually what you're doing is making the space for them via the parallel road, the village street, the new village street. Again, like I said, we got into even where we want the turning movements to be handled and the like. So this was the Placer Mill Road, Colette Road, Delray Drive. This is Delray Drive for those of you that might not know. This is Placer Mill. This is Colette. What's happening here is this whole Gypsum Hills, Gypsum Mills, I'm sorry if I can remember, Gypsum Hills? Mills. All right, I write my H's like M, so I wrote it several times, but couldn't read my own writing, I guess. Point being is that those large number of residences, and right now what happens for them to get to the tops or anything in the plazas that are closer to them in Farmington is they come down here, they take a left, and they've got to go down to McMahon. McMahon doesn't have a light. By doing this, we allow the crossover, it gets you over to Mertensia, and there they have it. It also diffuses and separates the traffic. We looked at McMahon. The idea was originally try and look at adding turning lanes. Space isn't there for it. What this does end up, though, again, with a utilized portion of the rail, and again, it's not like it's CSX freight train and Amtrak on the West Shore line or the CSX main line with 55 plus trains per day coming through there or whatever they're up to. And obviously, it depends on the economy. It would still require an at-grade crossing. We've got required, again, we wanted to make sure, can we get a 15-foot setback? This is closer to about 25 to 30. We did it here. These are what you need for the crossing grates, but you still have an at-grade crossing. Never preferable, but we're clearly not going to build anything over top of it to get there. It adds a fourth lane, and as you can see, again, you're getting a more standard intersection. Yes, there's a bit of a curve, but this is not going to be signed for 45 miles an hour, probably advanced signage of stop coming and the like. This would extend Willowbrook Road to create a new connection with Route 96, signalized intersection on the neck place. The problem is not being able to add any type of a third left turn lane on Main Street Fishers to head northbound. That with a signal here, and even with some traffic that comes, we know there's a one-lane road to the north. Even with that, it gets us some improvement. I'm going to go so far as to say this doesn't give us as much improvement as the other ones we just showed you, and I want to step back to this because I think it's an important one. Just like the one we talked about, Church Street. This is a much safer design for the speeds you're seeing. The blue line is just me circling it. It's not going to be that big. This is not a rotary. You're not going to come whipping around it at 55 miles an hour. It will force people to slow down and put all cars in a better position, all vehicles in a better position in the event that there is any type of a crash. And notice if I use the word accident, I apologize. They're not accidents in most cases. They're crashes. They're the result of bad behaviors. Here, if that's the case, and you have speeding and the like, this is really, and these would be, separating it so you get basically the right type of entrance angle. And these are the things you no longer have perpendicular or T-bone crashes. What you end up with is, at worst, you're getting side swipes. Much less damage, much less risk to life and injury if that's the case. Again, Omnitech Place, Willowbrook Road connection, just one of those other ones. Why are these roads not coming together? So, as we did this, we talked about the diverging diamond, not with the state on this one. It's in the comp plan. There's one at 590 and Linton. Again, they're an incredibly, I shouldn't say incredibly, they are a much safer alternative than some things, namely because as you come up here, you shift onto the other side of the road. So you're taking away the conflict point of having to turn in front of traffic because you are the traffic. The other thing that this would allow us to do is to also get this offbound, this 490 eastbound off-ramp through 96 northbound. I know we're sort of looking at it, we sort of spun it so you can see the design better, but this is obviously heading back up towards Parrington, the county line in the mall. Interesting idea. Again, when you can do this on surface without bridge, a lot better, because what you really want is to take this and get people almost coming like this as they cross over, right? Here it's not as much of a deflection, it's a different type of configuration, people would be concerned. Still a very good idea. Cost-wise though, when we looked at what we might get out of it, not so much. So as long as we're talking costs, and here's where some people will have sticker shock, for some of us, for most of us in the industry, we don't. These are the costs. They're roughly always about a 25% contingency. I can tell you though that, as I was showing you sort of the recommendations, these are engineers' estimates. Just as an example, if we're getting down to talking the 3-lane conversion to 5-lane, we have 87,000 square feet of pavement reconstruction, 266,000 square feet of pavement milling and resurfacing, 13,400 square feet of concrete sidewalk. That's the level we got down to. We don't typically do that in planning studies, but again, as I mentioned, all of the plans up to this point didn't have a level of specificity to take this to the next level. These are our construction costs. They're not including design and inspection. Obviously, this was the big one. We had looked at bringing in and around Papa Jack's, and then taking it over to where we have it now, which is School Street, turns into Adams Street, Digital Street, shop to Maple. Again, significantly less because it's about 1/3 to 1/4 of the difference. But it doesn't get you all of the benefits you have here of the access points to those other businesses. It doesn't necessarily help out with what you're seeing at 251 and Lane Road, which again, this to me is a very nice cost for something that's going to fix that substandard intersection, that non-standard intersection. The 3-lane to 5-lane conversion, again, looking at it, yeah, it's up there, but it's not something that's completely out of the realm of possibility. None of these are really that much. The Class Mill flat road guys are very, very reasonable. This roundabout, it's going to be a bit expensive. There's a lot to do there when we look at some of the earthwork and other items. But for the safety benefit, if people like it, that's when we start looking at more of the benefits of these things. Omnitech Place, Willowbrook Road, I don't mind keep using the pointer, you can read this, I'm just going down the list. get kind of trigger happy with that thing after a while. The I-490 interchange 29 diverging diamond, that's sort of an interesting one. We're assuming no bridge work. When Fisher Associates, who was a sub-consultant on the comp plan, they put it at about $4 million, but their justification was it was similar to 590 Winton. We looked at it and said, well, we'll cost it out again, very specifically. Bridge work gets you into a whole another level of detail. Let's make sure people really want it before we get there. And some of the signalization and lane configuration changes are, in that $150,000 to $200,000 range. Before I kind of talk about the programmatic alternatives, like I said, these things all don't have to be done at once. They're meant to build off of each other. They're meant to work in concert. Part of our task, part of our charge going forward, based on comments, will be how do we phase these. So when you start looking at these things, that bottom one, signalization and lane configuration changes, trust me, that is not the silver bullet. I will reiterate it. People have always said, just do a better job with the lights. I think the best we've seen is maybe 7 to 10%. These decisions and their impacts are really going to make differences on the margin. As a whole, though, you start to see some pretty good things. We'll get to that on the impacts. Programmatic alternatives, we looked at these, we said, two things. Really, access management, it probably applies mostly to the eastern end of the corridor, which is I should say, south of the village, southeast of the village. These are where you look at driveway access and widths. You look at, can we connect and have shared parking? Can we have, things like shared driveways, frontage and access roads? Just get people off of 96, let them, make a quick turn, get to where they're going, sort of like you see at the mall. And we're going to talk about the mall in a minute. There's medians, there's corner clearances where you're doing things that allow traffic to flow efficiently but also safely. Complete streets is just this idea that all users have the right to expect to be able to travel safely and efficiently, and that means that you start to look at things for biking and walking. So it gets a little bit interesting. As we originally intended, we thought, hey, we brought our complete streets expert up from Falmouth, Portland, Maine, one of only 25 National Complete Streets Coalition certified experts. He had a lot of great suggestions. Not looking to make more work for anybody here, but complete streets really do require that somebody get in there and get very detailed about the slopes of driveway and the like in the village, as well as what it would take and where it would be good, because you can have what we call bicycle boulevards on a larger scale. Bicycle boulevards really are, you don't have to have them on the main road, you put them more on the side road. That's more conducive, lower volume of vehicles, and it's good for them. They still have very, easy connections, easy ways to get through, but you're not creating those conflicts between the metal boxes and the unprotected or more vulnerable users. So here's some things we didn't analyze, and more or less, unless we hear, and I didn't want to say we wrote them off because we haven't, we'd be interested in hearing them, but the 250 reliever road across Route 96 has been looked at. It's a good idea. There's development proposed for there now. If you think there's challenges with the current railroad alignment, there's even more going back there when we started looking at it. I-490 ramps to Eastview Mall, you're now talking about things that are called a break-in access. FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, signs off on those. I'll look to Paul from NISDOT. I think they usually lose the time. They don't do a lot of those. They don't want to do them. They don't view it. They want as few interchanges, exits, ingress and egress to the interstate system as possible, and they're certainly not doing it for a private developer or a group of private developers. The bike lanes under the thruway bridge. This was one looking at it. We didn't analyze it. Might be a good idea. Not saying it's not. Should be looked at as more of a complete streets or active transportation approach, or comprehensive active transportation plan for the town of village. I put the quotes around improvements because depending on who you talk to about these, there were improvements if you made it easier to drive, there was improvements that made it more difficult to drive. Again, these things all work in concert. What we are recommending from the project alternatives, a lot of this will probably take that away, except for the people that have to go back there. It's not as much of a need for the cut-through when you see the results that we end up with in that portion of the corridor. Village bypass along, or road widening and village bypass along new alignment. And the first one is sort of self-explanatory. It's coming out here and we'd be able to see the cars going by that window because they'd be right up on it if you're going to widen in the village. Not going to happen. The village bypass along new alignment, what we're saying here is we're not considering a bypass. Another new village street isn't shifting people north or south. We're not adding an alternate route that's signed or anything else where improvements need to be made there. We're certainly not talking about the construction of a new road, altogether new construction. The reuse of the railroad between Placer Mill Road and Brace Road. We looked at the railroad at Delray, Placer Mill. It was one thing because of the connectivity and the ability to provide access to Hortensia with the signal. Here we looked at it and said, initial sort of our cursory level technical review says probably not there. The last one, a light rail line from Geneva or Canandaigua to Rochester, way beyond the charge of this. There is a regional transportation plan through 2040. We looked at it, reviewed it. It's not mentioning this right now. These types of changes for something like this are not just a function of you build it and they come. You need developers to do what's called TOD, transit-oriented development. You need a market, typically a growing market, because people don't just shift themselves to a new style of living as far as something that's dense enough to support light rail or commuter rail, as the case may be. With that said, you never want to say never. We just didn't analyze it as part of this, and there doesn't seem to be a huge appetite for it. Again, we got all 5 comments on transit when we did the survey, so something to think about. Here's some things we didn't analyze but would recommend for additional study, or even would put in as recommendations. Turning issues on Phillips and Langman roads as you're coming out on Main Street Fishers, definitely something, or I'm sorry, on Route 251, Victor Mendon, definitely something to be looked at there. Speed limit changes. These are warrant studies that the state will do on its facilities. Generally, they go through the town, village, they go through County Traffic Safety Board. Find and recommend them. If you got ideas, all ears, we'd love to hear them. Town-wide bicycle and pedestrian improvements, this whole idea of our programmatic alternatives that we mentioned. Town-wide aesthetic improvements. Again, we got into this and realized we had enough to handle trying to look at the delay that was always the top issue that we kept hearing about. Paving Lower Fishers Road was one we heard about, which was interesting. Variable message sign deployment. This is the idea that you could place the message signs that you see out there, the digital signs. They're programmable. A lot of them can be done remotely. You probably see them in other cities. It will tell you X number of minutes to the next interchange, to the next exit. Definitely something to be looked at. Just to give you an idea, I believe the state of New York has one for Darien Lake that they use during concerts and special events. It's actually on 390. I mean, that's where you have to figure out about placing these things. You have to get people before they're ready to get off. We heard about this creation of a Route 96 cultural corridor. It would seem to have a lot of merit, probably not a transportation efficiency issue, something that could be considered. I left the best for last. The removal of the throughway tolls. It's been talked about. I hope I don't pronounce her name incorrectly. Ms. Steeling provided us a ton of background on this. This is not so much of a traffic engineering study. What it really comes down to is you're looking at elasticity of demand. You're saying changes in prices and time will affect the route that people choose. And that's really what you would be looking at for the throughway tolls, is what would the impact be if those were no longer of any cost to a regular commuter, and what percentage of those commuters would then shift? What is that elasticity of demand? How much does it stretch and contract, based on various items like time and price? And obviously time goes up as more traffic comes in 2040. So what does it all mean? I kind of like to say, what's the so what? You came up with all these ideas. What does it do? And I'm going to get the laser pointer back out here. This is very difficult to read. What I want to point out to you, and again, I tried to figure out how to do this. Could have just hit the highlights, but then people might want to see what it is, and we can always go through it. This is what you have in 2017 from level of service, and I want to take a moment. Maybe it's good you can't read it, or most of you can't read it, but I'm going to use the screen. I want to talk about level of service. It is A, B, C, D, E, and F. It is not like your report card in school, okay? C's and D's are good for level of service. A and B means you have too much. You've built too much. You don't need it. If you're getting there anyway, that's one thing, and you can afford some new growth, great, so it's okay to see it. But ideally, you don't want everything to be A and B. A and B is like I said, it signifies that you've added a lot of capacity you may or may not use. C's and D's are sort of the sweet spot. E means it's starting to get to that problem. And F, this is High Street, Cobblestone, Turk Hill Road. We looked at this one. I wanted to mention them all. What we generally found was there's not a lot that can be done there. We can do a bit with the signals, but at the end of the day, there's the ingress, egress, and internal circulation that occurs at the mall, and some of those things. If you want to get this fixed, that's where it's going to happen. I should add that this is what would happen in the future no-build with us not proposing to do the things we're proposing, those alternatives we modeled, those project alternatives. All of a sudden, you start to see outside of the mall, we got things working. We've got those occasional A's and B's. I'm not going to apologize for them. They are what they are. They might have been different. We did consider one-way configurations for that road, and it was said no because that wasn't going to be good for business. You don't know what happens, but really when you start to look at it, it's still a whole heck of a lot better. And some of these tie into each other. So while you don't have anything here, you can't just automatically say, well, geez, the D isn't really that great. Actually, it's very good because Railroad and Maple would be the equivalent of what you're seeing at Maple and at 96 or more in Maple Avenue, which is really here. And that wasn't necessarily getting much better. So it was going to get worse, or it does get a little bit worse with us cutting off School Street. Overall, I want to show you on the segments too, how this works. And I know, again, this gets cut off. But these are some of the segments in the cross streets. Again, these start to look really good. Raleigh Road, Main Street, Fishers, that segment where it's with 96, not great. That was the one along with Commons Boulevard that we just knew we couldn't get to. Turk Hill Road gets a little bit better. There's some changes there. But generally, what I want to impart to you is if you look at this is north and southbound. Here, you're at about, I think, a D right now. If you don't do anything through 2040, you hit F. That's what happens. For somebody traveling along the corridor, you are at F. You're at DF under either one of these scenarios, and this isn't the total, we don't have it at the bottom. But the corridor-wide level of service goes to C. So think about the costs you saw, think about what we proposed. It really puts you in a place where you can grow as the projections say it's going to grow, which are still pretty significant. I can go back and look. I actually have them. There's some pretty significant ones in terms of upwards of anywhere between, we were looking at growth of anywhere between like 18% to almost 30%, depending on the corridor. Not saying that by doing this you have to grow like that. All we're saying is options and choice are a good thing. For Victor's continued success, for Ontario County's continued success, from both a quality of life and economic development standpoint, these are fixes that can get you there. Again, they're up to you. Everything's draft at this point. There might be tweaks, there might be things you don't like for reasons other than efficiency and traffic. But when we go out to public meetings and we do a survey that gets 900 responses, and people say to us, delay is the number one issue, we're glad to be able to come and say, yes, we can do something about that. We can get you to that sweet spot for 2040. This is a good thing. This was a worthwhile exercise and effort to go through. Next steps, real quick. We've got the steering committee, like I said, very, very well represented by all of the key players. It's wonderful when you get the town and village. That doesn't happen everywhere. I mean, I've got to give our representatives, both Councilman Tantillo, Trustee Camiso, and Mayor Henn. This doesn't happen everywhere where town and villages get together. I've been in communities where you can go over and tell them what happened at the steering committee. Not a good way to do business. So we've got a great steering committee. We rely on them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all the public comments we received tonight. We've got 3 different people taking notes. You can submit them via email. You can submit them via the forum. Just make sure they're here by December 1st. Our goal is as we go through this now to develop a draft plan. We're going to put together all of those recommendations we went through. We're going to put together a data dictionary of all the data that we reviewed as part of this. We're going to get basically a document put together, and then we're going to get that out to the steering committee after they tell us what they'd like us to do with the alternatives. And then we're going to get their comments there and incorporate those into the actual plan. We incorporate those into the plan, we develop that, and then we start preparing materials for SEQA, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which will take place in 2018 ideally, and our goal is to have all of that wrapped up in spring of 2018. With that, really, the biggest thing, and on to the part we need to get to, biggest thing, thank you. It's not always the most fun thing to come out for on a Wednesday night, but it's obvious that you guys care very deeply about this community. You care about what happens on Route 96 because of how integral it is to Victor. Wanted to let you know that we took that as a very deeply and very seriously as our charge. With that said, one of the things I put together for the first public meeting was sort of our quick reference guide, and we had three keys for facilitators. One of them was we don't have solutions yet. I can check that one off. The other one was listen more than you talk. You have 2 ears but only one mouth for a reason. And the third one is on all of this, we're not going to take any of it personal. We know it's the traffic, not us. So with that, I'll turn it over, and I can go back through slides. I can answer questions if you want me to pull up details. I'm happy to do that, but I would say who wants to start out and have at it?